Hello everyone and welcome to episode 6 of the Winmark Board Insights podcast. I'm pleased to say that today we're joined by Winmark NED member, Robert, or better known as Bob Beveridge. Bob has had a fascinating career, and particularly in the non-executive landscape with public company experience, as well as some wide-ranging experience in other areas. He has been a chairman of the audit committee. He's been a senior independent director, an NED at the likes of Hampshire Hospitals, NHS Foundation Trust, Internet Q PLC, Brady PLC. So definitely a plethora of experience with Bob, who joins us today. And Bob, welcome and thank you very much for coming along.
Pleasure.
Just to set the scene a little bit, as we like to do at the beginning of all of these episodes, Bob, many organisations that we've been speaking to, and obviously that's been quite apparent in the media at the moment, have been involved in the supporting of public services and charitable foundations and charities in general. We've seen funding pages set up, a variety of activities for employees to help with donations, and I think the general feel has been that businesses are doing everything they can to support the efforts of our NHS and other government entities, and it's been a time of people really bringing together. Another part of this, which has been really interesting, has been around the ventilator challenge, and I would just like to kind of bring you now into our discussion. If you could introduce one of these fascinating organisations that you are involved on the board with at this moment in time, and introduce a little bit about their role and what you've been doing around this ventilator challenge, Bob.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Yes, you're referring to Inspiration Healthcare Group Limited, where I've been on the board for nearly 3 years. It's a small but very important medical technology company. Its turnover is approaching 20 million a year. 2/3 of that's in the UK. So they're a key supplier to the NHS, focusing on technology which improves outcomes for patients, mainly focused, I have to say, on babies. So it's neonatal intensive care. But as part of that, they source equipment from other suppliers around the world, and we also commission and have manufactured on our behalf breathing equipment and other pieces of critical care equipment. So it's a very interesting and important organisation, albeit relatively small in the context of the NHS. It has a very strong purpose, which is obviously to improve health outcomes through providing highly advanced medical technology. So it's got a very strong purpose, a very engaged small workforce, about just less than 100 people. Last year we made our first acquisition, which was of one of our core suppliers who made valves and breathing equipment products for us, and it's a very highly engaged and motivated small company. Yes, in the context of what's going on at the moment, on my other board, I'm on the board of Finsbury Foods, and we are making bread and cake, which is also an essential product in today's environment. That business has been significantly impacted because the food service sector has ground to a halt in this country. But of course, the grocery sector is growing strongly. But Inspiration, of course, is caught up right in the middle of the ventilator sourcing challenge that the NHS had. So back in February, I was actually on holiday, on a skiing holiday. I came back from a skiing holiday beginning of March, and I quickly realised what was going on and the need for ventilators. I put a call into the chief exec of Inspiration Healthcare, and I said, have we got any of our ventilators? Although they're mainly say small devices for neonatal for premature babies, they do actually sell adult ventilators as well, and we have, of course, very highly developed contacts with suppliers all around the world. I mean, these are made in Germany, Australia, America, Israel, and in European countries. So we've got a very good. So I asked the question, are we doing anything? They said, well, that's a very timely question, because indeed we are onto NHS supply chain at the moment and offering to source them some ventilators. And
Yeah.
within a few days, they put some calls out to suppliers in Israel, America, and Europe, and started to secure some ventilators, which was the first task really.
Yeah.
And it was very, it felt very worthwhile and very good to be trying to help with something that's not just about making money, but about actually helping this challenge that we've got in as the country. Now, as time has passed, we've got sucked into more and do more and more, which we'll probably come on to as we talk more about this. But it's it got off to a very quick and urgent start, let's say.
I appreciate that there are definitely there's confidentiality around these sorts of challenges as well. So we fully appreciate that the work that you've been doing and how you've been communicating and addressing the situation and having that collaboration with the NHS, we won't want to delve into too much, but it would be interesting to build on how that idea came about. So obviously there was definitely some proactive thinking in you stepping out of the comfort zone and looking at supporting in this. How did the communication lines open up between you and whoever it may have been in the NHS or government in getting this moving and getting you more formally involved?
Well, there were a number of different channels. I mean, I wasn't, of course, involved in all the detail of it, so I don't have all of that. But obviously, we have an ongoing relationship because we supply vital equipment to the NHS. We have an ongoing relationship not only with most major hospitals directly, but also with the NHS supply chain organisation, which is the central procurement arm of the NHS, and it was them who launched the project to source thousands and thousands of ventilators. And at the climax of that, I mean, after a few days after the discussion that we'd had that I mentioned with the NHS supply chain, Boris Johnson, you may remember, hosted a call. It was published in the press. He hosted a call with potential suppliers, and at that point, I think Neil Campbell, who's our chief executive and highly experienced in this field, identified by Boris and his team as someone who could add a lot of value to their thinking and their planning of this whole project. And so he then got absorbed and asked to take on a role as a technical advisor to the whole ventilator challenge project, which subsequently set up to work with, as you know, a large number, quite a significant number of big manufacturing companies. And Neil sits as the technical advisor to the management team that's running that project.
Right. Well, that's really interesting. The fact that the recommendations and noises were coming from the top place in government is quite a testament to the work that you guys are doing.
It was very urgent. I mean, they were facing at the time, if you remember, they were embarking on what we now know as the herd strategy, and they I think, again, this is mainly what I read in the press, but they picked up they worked out they had a forecast from the Cambridge the analytics group that they were going to need that the NHS was going to be overwhelmed and they were going to need tens of thousands of ventilators. And at that point they changed strategy. I think it's fairly clear that we all know that. So been a bit of a moving feast. I mean, it's not to say this has been it doesn't necessarily look like a plan as opposed to a reaction to a need and a very urgent need, which we've, an organisation, very happy to help with. I mean, we've also agreed to set up. We provide 24/7 service as part of our ongoing business model. We provide 24/7 service. So if there's issues with operating some of this equipment, people can the hospitals can phone our 24/7 helpline, and we've expanded that to cover all of the ventilators that are being sourced now, so that one-stop shop for all hospitals to use. So we've been gradually asked to take on more to help this very important initiative, I think.
Fantastic. The fact that obviously you are a seasoned non-executive director and have worked with a variety of different organisations, a very good one as well, I might add. this situation that's come about is, and it's been an overused term, but it does sum it up, is quite unprecedented. So organisations always like to have a plan in place with their contingency planning, etc. But from the NED perspective, not just around the ventilator challenge, but also specifically with the healthcare organisation that you're working for, what has been your own personal role? Because we know that NEDs play a big role in helping management focus, develop and pivot, the strategy, amongst a number of other things. But where has your key focus been for this specific board during this time?
Okay, well, it's an interesting question. I mean, as ever, you expect me to say this, it is a team effort, and as a non-executive, you are a small part of the team. But it's easy, actually, in a crisis or an urgent situation, that NEDs can add the most value. They can be most helpful on the one hand if they're good, or they can be the most unhelpful if they're not very good.
Yes.
So obviously my best efforts go to being good, and it's about firstly staying calm and staying calm in the crisis. There's no problem. You don't get to my age without working out that there's no problem for which there isn't a solution. It sometimes isn't obvious what the solution is, but you can get to a solution at some point.
Definitely.
So I mean, there was a situation, actually, an inspiration in this particular example, where we were part way through the audit. For the year end was 31st of January, so I'm chair of audit committee. We're part way through the audit. They've done the auditor had done the field work, and were working through to completing it to the same timetable we'd always agreed. And we had some extra questions on going concern and what the impact of coronavirus was, which for us is broadly neutral but positive, actually, because we are sourcing more equipment rather than less equipment to the NHS. Some of our international sales will be affected, but overall it's positive for us. But it comes 2 or 3 days before we going to publish our results. The auditor phoned the chief financial officer and said, I don't think we're going to be able to complete the audit as we'd agreed for the audit committee, and published audited results. And so the CFO phoned me up and was not the calmest I've ever heard him, and he said, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I was able, because again, I've had this, not exactly this situation, maybe in the situation before. I said, hang on a minute. We don't actually have to have the results, or we can publish unaudited results. If you go back 5 to 10 years, it was actually quite common to put your results unaudited. You've done sufficient work with the auditors to know the numbers were right. And actually, there's a piece at the end which is very frustrating for everyone who works in business, which is ticking all the boxes and crossing the T's and dotting the I's. And it's that bit that was not finished, and all the internal review processes within the audit firm. So I just said, well, check with the Nomad, but I'm pretty sure we'll just be able to. And so he phoned me back a half an hour later. He said, you've saved our life, because they've got all investor meetings lined up. It would have looked pretty unprofessional to have not been able to publish your results. So that's a small example of where, by being calm and thinking clearly about what you need to do, can add value. I wouldn't say that's a huge thing, but the other thing really is actually being available for informal communications with all of the executive teams over this period. So we haven't had any more board meetings than we would normally have, but we've had lots of informal phone calls, email chats, impromptu voice chats, and it's as much about helping them to make sure that they're covering off everything they think they need to do. So within a few early in March, they issued some guidelines to all the employees about how we needed to change behaviours in this period, starting to prepare for home working, etc., and protocol for visiting hospitals. So they started all of it, and to be able to just bounce things off us and be able to discuss as a friendly advisor I think is helpful to the executives, because it's a lonely job being a chief executive. I've never been a chief executive, I'm pleased to say. I'm very happy. I'm always very happy being the number 2 as a finance director, and then passing my advice on to the chief exec. And it's a bit like that as a you give your advice, but ultimately the chief exec's got to make the decision. It's a lonely job, and it's useful for him or her to have someone to talk to, I think. So I think I think that's probably another area where I've been able to be helpful, and then just being empathetic and not waste time with unnecessary. Obviously, when the pace of change ramps up dramatically in this situation, and the board meeting we had was much shorter than it would normally have been, and much more focused. And we were very empathetic about not asking questions just for the sake of it, and being very conscious of time and efficiency. I think that's very important as well.
You make a really interesting point about the CEO and how they're dealing with this situation. The CEO network that I also manage alongside the NED one, we've had some really interesting conversations with CEOs about how they're communicating to their people. So who does the message come from? How is it communicated? Why is it important that it comes from the top? And what we found out of that is that whilst it's the CEO that is doing the communication and has their name on the signature, they have been leaning on and looking for advice a lot from the non-executive board. So we've actually seen during this time CEOs and chairmen collaborating more than they perhaps have ever before to make these sorts of decisions, because where the CEO essentially their day-to-day influence on the company has in some ways increased, not to everybody, but especially to their senior cohort team around them. They're speaking to them literally every other day, or every day in some cases, checking how people are, how's the whole business doing. So being able to offload some of their own concerns to the non-executives in the company has been really useful. So it's interesting that you say that you're kind of acting as that sort of shoulder to cry on, so to speak, although it's much more than that, of course.
It's advice on the way, you see, because you haven't got the time to wait for another board meeting to have a discussion about something. Decisions have to be made very quickly, and in that case, if there's a good mutually working relationship between the executives and the non-executives, it happens fairly naturally. These conversations just happen as part of I'm just phoning to check out, this is what we're doing, and I'm just checking that you're comfortable with it. Is there anything else that you think we should be doing? Type of conversation, and it provides some extra confidence and assurance, I think, to the executives as they're moving at a very rapid pace and making very quick decisions on things.
Absolutely, and the other point that you made around being empathetic is hugely important during this time. Do you see the relationship between the exec and non-executive boards and the role of the NED plays within businesses changing due to what's been going on recently? So you mentioned about the board meetings that have been happening. We've heard from others that it's amazing how what used to be a 3-hour meeting can be done virtually in 1 hour or less, and you get the same amount, if not more, out of it. So do you think the way that boards collaborate, non-exec versus exec, and how they bring it all together will change off the back of this because of the improvements or successes that have been had?
I think we've all had some new learning experiences. So we've seen that it's possible to run meetings without having to be face to face. In fact, in Inspiration, at the end of last financial year, we did a mini board evaluation, and we realized we agreed together that we would do alternate meetings between face to face and using video conference, and we've done that for some time, actually, for about 6 months. We've been doing that, and we do find it makes it works well. You can have a focused meeting in the way that we are today. It doesn't necessarily replace the more full face to face board meeting. You perhaps get together informally the night before. You have a chance to talk more broadly about a lot of things. I think it's not about changing from one to the other, but adding some new ways of working alongside current ones to enrich the relationships, I think, between executives and non-executives. I think we're all old people have suddenly become expert in technology. I mean, I've always had a particular interest in.
You're not talking about yourself there, Bob, are you? No way.
No, I've always had a very keen interest in technology, but a lot of people my age haven't. But they've suddenly all had to become experts. My mother, my 89-year-old mother, now uses the iPad, and
Yeah.
we do video calls with her, and she joins the weekly family quiz every week. I mean, it's marvelous to see that, and in business, I should say in Finsbury, where I'm on the board as well, last year they implemented a system called Workplace, which is a Facebook equivalent for business, and it works similar to Facebook. You have different groups for different working groups and cross-functional groups, and there's a board group, and it's a brilliant additional tool for communication. And that's been very heavily used in this situation, because the chief executive can put a video up there, and the other executives can put videos up there, which can be very widely seen by the organization. And communication and empathy are the we always say we're very good as business people, always saying people are our most important asset, and then we don't really follow that through. But in times like this, it's so important, because if you've got working at home, we know that it's unsustainable. The pressure and stress on working at home is not sustainable, and there will be an increase in people with mental health issues and problems and issues. And it's so important that every time we talk to somebody, we say, how are you? How is it for you at home? How's it going? Just to give them the chance to say whether they're okay and whether there's anything wrong. And it's even, and maybe this is another learning, because it's kind of so obvious when you've got to do this, that maybe we'll become better at and might improve our business empathy skills, maybe.
You've opened up a whole can of worms there, but I totally agree with you about the organizations when it comes to values and purpose. And it's very easy to write a couple of words like integrity and trust up on a board and say these are our values. But when you have a real life live acid test like we've got with COVID-19, it does separate the wheat from the chaff a little bit, in terms of, okay, you care about your employees, now put it into action. And I've also seen that from a digital perspective in some organizations that we work with, where they often talk about the progressiveness of the internal digital capability, but when this happened and you have to go to that full working from home, there was a worry about how they were going to maintain it and actually utilize that capability effectively. So this has actually been a really interesting time for showing businesses where their gaps are and where they can be more effective, and what they can do to get better. So I totally agree with you on that, and I think that's an excellent point that you make. Going back to the ventilator challenge, and I guess how it will reflect on your career when you look back on it. I mean, just a company helping to deliver ventilators in this time of great need is undoubtedly a highlight for the business, and probably something for your career as well. Have there been any other standout moments like this where you'd look back and think, you know what, I'm exceptionally proud of this, and this is what we want to do to contribute to business and to society? Is there anything that stands out for you in particular, either during this time again with Finsbury Food Group, for example, or in the past, that sort of is on a similar platform to this?
Well, as I said before, as a non-exec, you're there as much as anything else to make sure that things work as well as possible. The governance is what I've got a term that I call appropriate governance, rather than a lot of box ticking and backside covering. And appropriate governance requires the non-exec to be more engaged with the business than just rocking up to meetings once every couple of months, and to form informal judgments based on listening to a lot of people, not just the 2 or 3 executives that you meet in the board. And you gain assurance, that's the technical word, isn't it? You gain assurance from different sources than board papers. And I think in my case, I think that's what I'm most proud of. I think I try and have an effective relationship with people, and try and minimize the amount of unnecessary bureaucracy. I've introduced the QCA, the QCA code, corporate governance code, Quoted Companies Alliance, into all my AIM listed companies, and we've actually found that really quite helpful as a way of having a conversation about governance, and which is not everybody's favorite topic, but by using that as a skeleton for a discussion, it's actually been useful. And I think people would say that the audit committees, you know, by and large run smoothly as a result. I mean, there are some, to be honest, as I mentioned, there's nothing really we like as a non-exec more than a good crisis, because it's when we can actually, you know, really say that we added some value. Now, what is a crisis? I had a crisis of another audit problem in one of my earlier companies, where the audit partner in the audit committee meeting said, like, I don't think we'll be able to sign off on the audit because we can't get the bank reconciliation to balance. I said, what do you mean you can't get the bank to? Well, it was £5,000 out. So I said, well, it's £5,000 out. You know, this is a multi-million-pound organisation. What are you talking about? She said, well, it could be 1,005,000 out one way and 1 million the other way. And I said, well, come off it. And so I ended up having and so we agreed that we would not let that stop the audit meeting. We would do whatever it took to prove that that wasn't a problem, which it obviously wasn't a problem.
Yeah.
But you know, that particular partner, the veins were popping out of her neck at the time, and in stress of that. I mean, another one was I go back to the Hampshire hospitals. I was hired there because they wanted someone with acquisition experience. Basingstoke Hospital was about to acquire this neighbouring Winchester Hospital and Andover Hospital, and they didn't have anyone on the board who had experience of that, of acquisitions. And I was proud to be able to help them to think through the criteria for doing the acquisition, but importantly, working out how to integrate it. Because I've done, again, working in my PLC roles, I worked in a number of different ways in which we integrated businesses. Sometimes you would buy a company and it was so strong, standalone with its processes and controls, you would largely leave it alone and run it as an independent subsidiary. In other cases, you would integrate it and create a new, bigger brand or a new, bigger culture and organization around the combined entity. And that's indeed what we decided to do. We decided to run 3 hospitals as one from acquisition. And I was involved in helping the doctors to understand what that meant and how it would work in practice. And when it came to it, it was regarded, I think, within the NHS, it was written up by one of the independent bodies as a case study in how to do a good acquisition, because it was integrated extremely efficiently, and you've got really high performing hospitals now in Hampshire. So, and I felt that personally I'd added quite a lot of value to that because of the experience I was able to bring from, you know, from my executive life. That'd be another example. So occasionally these things come along and you grab them with both hands. It's a bit like, I liken it a bit like to being a helicopter pilot. You try and stay up here if you can, but if you've got to dive down, you dive down and you help, and then you quickly get back in the helicopter and get up in the sky again, where you rightly belong.
Very good. A man of many analogies. I like it. I do like it. Bob, it's been really interesting today. And if you don't mind, I'd just like to finish off with a couple of last questions for you. The first one would be that it's been sort of shown that the demand has now decreased, and the government has put a halt to several of the ventilator projects that have been in circulation. Could we suggest that because of that, now we may be on the right track with demand going down, that we're going in the right direction in terms of this virus, and that the fact that we don't need them as much as we did previously would point us that things are looking up for us, maybe?
I'm talking here as much based on what I've read as opposed to what I've been involved with in
absolutely. I'll put you a bit on the spot there. So
the number one operation, the Ventilator UK Challenge, run by the chap Dick Elsley, the CEO, and where Inspiration is acting as a technical advisor and as a QA advisor, is manufacturing on two different ventilators, and is going to produce a large quantity. I can't remember the exact number, 10,000 or 15,000 or something. So it's generating quite a lot over the next period of time. When the government started, they appeared to place orders, or the NHS supply chain appeared to place orders with a lot of other different suppliers as well. I mean, Dyson is obviously the one that got all the publicity, and Dyson, worked very hard to try and prepare a ventilator. Ventilators are not like vacuum cleaners. They're very sophisticated products. If they're slightly wrong, they can significantly damage your lung, never mind bring you back to life again. So they're really very sophisticated pieces of equipment. And I think what happened was that they probably placed orders with too many different manufacturers. And so they had to weed it down. I mean, at the end of the day, the components, some of the core components are used by a number of different manufacturers. So if you placed, as a theoretical example, if you placed an order for twice as many ventilators as you needed, and if you think about it, this behavior is probably leveraged up by the same sort of thing going in most other countries. They're trying to source ventilators. Suddenly, the pressure on the component manufacturers is enormous, and then suddenly even the primary contractor may find it hard to get components. So I think it was important to bring it back to something that's manageable. Your question about whether we just don't know, do we? We're locked down, and we at the moment we're told that the number of patients with new infections are reducing, although they're still coming forward. The number of deaths hasn't started coming down, and we have not yet got a plan of how we're going to come out of lockdown. So the challenge for most businesses, not for Inspiration, but I mean for Finsbury, I mentioned before, we're now working out what the new normal is going to look like when we come back out of it, because it will look different, and that's a challenge. I don't think we can say we're over the hill on this by a long way. I think at the moment, no. Your question?
The new norm is definitely, I think, one of the key objectives for people to try and work out, and unfortunately nobody really knows the answer to it, so it's going to be very much learning on a day by day.
It's judgment. You can use your judgment and make the most likely guess, which is what good business people do all the time. And in this sort of situation, again, it's one of my favorite expressions is never waste a good crisis. Again, having lived through what appear to be economic crises and things in the past, at least 2 in my lifetime. The strong firms get through them. The strong business get through. The weak ones fail. And so it's an opportunity, as we said earlier in this conversation, there's an opportunity to learn some things from this and to make ourselves stronger. And in Finsbury's case, we're determined to come out a stronger business, more competitive than we were before. And Inspiration is using this as an opportunity to do more and to grow our business. It's a fantastic opportunity for Inspiration Healthcare to reinforce our position as a leader in neonatal intensive care. So every crisis is an opportunity.
Brilliant. And I guess that eases me into my last and final question, Bob, today, which is, if there's one thing that the NEDs will be taking from this universally, it doesn't matter which company that you're working for, what industry sector, what's the one thing that the non-execs are really going to take from this that they're going to utilize and learn from going forward?
From this conversation, you mean?
from this situation that we find ourselves in with coronavirus.
Oh, well, I think that there's always a solution. No, what I said right at the beginning, there's no problem to which there isn't a solution. And a well-functioning team working well together with good people will find the best possible solution. And of course, there are some industries that it's going to be much more difficult than others. I'm not saying that's not a problem more of a problem for some industries than others, but there's always a solution, and the best, strongest business will come through, and they'll emerge stronger, and with having learned a lot. It's a shame that you learn all these things and you get very old in life, and it'd be useful if you learnt them when you were younger. But look at it, there's a whole generation of young people who are going to have a fantastic learning experience when they come out the other side, which they surely will.
Let's hope so. We've all missed the pub, that's for sure, and each other, but that's what you got Zoom for.
No, but it's not that bad. I've had more beers with two of my best mates in the last month than I have had in the previous year.
That's because you don't have to leave the house.
I know.
No one has
It's a
to move.
very pleasant way of spending an hour in the evening. I don't know why I hadn't thought of doing it before.
That completely goes against what you said earlier about making the face-to-face thing so important. We don't want to go to that. Everyone will be buying kegs into their house.
No, only it's occasionally in between the visits to the
Very good.
balance, Michael, as I said, it's not, one doesn't replace the other, but it's a useful reminder that in this particular, it's a trivial example, but it's actually fun to spend an hour talking with myself, a couple of my best friends, and I don't normally do it unless we go to the pub. Well, there is actually, we can do it outside, and that's the equivalent learning I was talking about with boards, isn't it? So that's probably a neat way to end this conversation.
Definitely. Very good, very good. Bob, thank you very much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and good to hear that things are moving forward nicely and steadily with the organisations you're working with. It's a testing time for all. So I'd just like to thank you for joining us and for your insights. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we've been joined by Bob Beveridge, one of the Winmark NED members. I've been Michael Yowett, the Programme Manager and Programme Lead for the board cluster, and we look forward to catching up with everybody again soon. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thanks.